Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, The New Breed of the CIO, sponsored by Workday and featuring our guest, Forrester Research. Before we dive into today's presentation, we have a few housekeeping items that we want to cover. If you're having any technical issues throughout the webinar, please click on the help icon at the bottom of the On24 console, and a support member will be able to assist you. Also, throughout the course of the program, please submit any and all questions you have on the topics discussed by clicking on the Q&A icon seen on your webinar screen. We'll address audience questions during a Q&A portion towards the end of the webinar. Lastly, following this presentation, all of you will receive a recording of the webinar via an email from the Workday team. As a reminder, don't hesitate to join our conversation on Twitter. Tweet at Workday and at Forrester using the hashtag #NewBreedOfCIO to be part of the discussion online. With that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, we have Nigel Finnick, who joins us from Forrester Research, where he is the Vice President and Principal Analyst serving CIOs. As Vice President and Principal Analyst, Nigel supports CIOs working across the C-suite to provide insight and guidance to a world disrupted by technology. A leader in digital business and strategy, Nigel can be seen speaking at events around the world, and he's frequently quoted in both trade and mainstream media. Recognized as a visionary with insight into emerging trends, he has published leading research on digital business, social media, business strategy, innovation, retail, and marketing. His latest research is on digital business, examining customer value and the fundamental business changes needed in the age of the customer to win, serve, and retain customers. So welcome, Nigel.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Also joining us for today's presentation is Diana McKenzie, Chief Information Officer at Workday. As Workday's CIO, she oversees the Global Information Services Organization with responsibility for the internal deployment of Workday products, as well as other innovative technologies and programs that create a competitive advantage for the company and serve as best practices to IS organizations globally. Prior to joining Workday, Diana was Senior Vice President and CIO at Amgen, where she spent 12 years applying leading-edge analytics and information technology to further the company's innovation and market position. Preceding Amgen, Diana served in a variety of IT leadership roles at Eli Lilly and Company. During her nearly 3 decades of experience, Diana has seen an active leader in various trade, technology, and governmental organizations, and in 2015 was recognized as one of the top 50 most powerful women in technology by the National Diversity Council. So welcome, Diana.
Thank you.
Again, thanks to all of you for joining today's discussion. And with that, I would like to pass it over to you, Nigel.
Well, thanks very much, Mike, and it's an honor to be with you today. So today, we're going to talk about some research that was published on the prediction of the evolving role of the CIO, and it's something that comes up a great deal in both our research and also questions from clients. And it really sort of hinges on this question that do CEOs actually need a new kind of CIO in the future, right? And what kind of CIO would that be? So I'm going to dig into a little bit about what we found from the research. What are the trends that are leading to this kind of question, and what can we learn from the research? And then and Diana and I are going to have a conversation around that, and in particular dig into things that are relevant to the role of the CIO and how it evolves over time. So what's going on right now? Well, we know obviously that digital is sort of the big theme of the industry, of the tech industry at the moment. In fact, some would argue it's overused. It seems like every company that we talk to wants to become a sort of a digital transformation leader. But there's good reason for this. Some of the research that we published highlights just how much the business world is changing. And the slide that I have here really gets to this point. We surveyed business executives, so not really just IT leaders, but mostly line of business executives, CEOs, and their direct reports. And we asked them how much of their revenue do they expect to be influenced by digital by the year 2020. And almost half of the executives surveyed actually expected more than 50% of sales to be influenced by digital by 2020. Now that is a huge shift in what the way business is conducted and how revenue is driven from where we are today. And to give you an understanding of how big a shift, the percentage influenced by digital today in most industries is significantly less than 10%. So this is an enormous change expected over the coming 3 years, essentially, if you think about the timeline. And it's really driving a lot of rethinking inside companies about how revenue is going to be driven. And one of the challenges that sort of facing existing business executives is that all of our experiences today are largely shaped by some degree through the experiences we have with our smartphones. So, for example, recently I stayed in a hotel where I could unlock my hotel room door with my phone. So, it's a nice little feature. I don't need to carry the plastic card around with me. I don't have to worry about demagnetizing it, etc. It's convenient and somewhat secure if my phone's locked. So it changes the experience of staying in a hotel room. Now, it ever so slightly also changes my expectation as to what should be possible in a hotel room stay. If I go and stay at a different hotel that doesn't offer that capability, now my expectations haven't quite been met. And so there's this subtle shift in how we perceive value against all of the different experiences we have in our lives. And it's these shifts, these incremental shifts, that add up to change our expectations, not just, say, in hotel stays, but what's possible in many areas of our lives. In other words, the expectations of your customers as a business are not set by your products and the products and services of your competitors. The expectations of your customers are now set by their experiences with companies like Amazon or with Airbnb or Uber. Their experiences are set by their expectations are set by the experience that they have day in, day out through their smartphones, through their portable devices, their internet connections that tap into a world of digital experiences. And this is really changing the way business works. And it leads to what I describe as the digital dilemma. And the digital dilemma is simply this. If you think about the way we perceive value as a mathematical equation, what you would do is you would put expectation as a denominator on the bottom of the equation there. And so if you put a number on our expectations, and then you put a number on the experiences, and you sort of write this equation out, you get this perceived value is equal to the experience over the expectations. Now, when everything's in balance, that's great. But if the expectations are constantly increasing, that means the denominator is getting bigger, then if the experiences are staying constant, what happens is perceived value diminishes. It goes down. And this is what's happening with many companies as the customers' experiences change and set expectations, the actual perceived value of any given product or service is slowly adjusting and evolving. And one of the problems that we have in business today is that our businesses are not designed to constantly change. Now, in a period where this equation evolves very slowly, we don't need to worry. We can develop new products and services in sort of at the same pace as this equation goes out of balance. But with digital experiences, the new experiences we're getting are changing almost daily, and this means that perceived value is evolving very, very quickly. And in fact, it's evolving too fast for most businesses to keep up with. And so what happens is over time, the perceived value of the customer goes down based on their experiences with any given product or service or brand. And the company has to then quickly evolve and change in order to be able to deliver this rapidly evolving set of experiences to the customer. And our companies are simply not designed to do that. They're not designed to evolve and change at that kind of pace. So what we see the sort of the leaders in the digital space doing is not just developing products and services, but actually thinking about how to create the experiences that deliver the outcomes that satisfy the customer's desires. And this is really sort of the old business paradigm versus the new business paradigm. The old business paradigm was very much inside out. You'd look at a business and say, okay, what are our core capabilities? And let's think about how we can build better products and services to satisfy a set of customer needs. The new business paradigm is very much outside in. It's looking at from the customer perspective and saying, how do we design those experiences that deliver the outcomes that satisfy the desires? And we do that through a series of products and services that include digital experiences. And in fact, we can see this when you think about if experiences shape the outcomes or the expectations of the customer, then the degree to which those experiences deliver the outcomes, they also shape the value perception of the customer. And this is very important to understand, because if we're thinking about how to go to market, how to satisfy a particular product need or a market need for a set of customers, we actually have to step back and say, what's the outcome that customer, this group of customers are really trying to get to? What is it they desire? And then how do we actually design those experiences to deliver those outcomes better? Can we use new technology, emerging technology, in a way that we haven't done or haven't been able to do to date in order to be able to better deliver those outcomes? And we see examples of companies being able to do this all over the place. If you think about, say, farming, a farmer has to buy seed to put into the ground and fertilizer and pesticide, etc. They're buying products, but the products themselves are not really what they desire. What they desire is actually high yield per acre. And so companies like Monsanto, like Pioneer, the agri division of DuPont, are developing data-based services to supply farmers with information about how best to plant their acreage in order to maximize yield. And that includes the density of seeds, the ability to, how much water to put in the land, what kind of chemistry you need to build per acre, based on the exact topography of a particular farm. Highly tailored to the customer and to their desired outcomes. And it really changes the business model for those kind of companies. And so we see this across many different industries. And when we ask executives to describe their digital business strategy, and if the trouble with digital businesses, it can be defined in many different ways. A lot of people think, well, it's putting a new website up, it's adding e-commerce capabilities, maybe it's adding social media. But when we ask executives to tell us how they think about their digital strategy, there's two distinct kind of strategies that come forward. One, where executives say we have a full strategy in place that defines how our business will create customer value as a digital business, really thinking about how to create that new source of value for customers. And the other one we commonly see is we have a strategy in place that adds digital elements to the existing business model. And what's really interesting is when we slice the data from our research, according to that expectation of how much business is going to be influenced by digital, and we put the higher companies, the companies that are having much more business influenced by digital, in the digital predator box, and then we look at the companies that are shifting their business toward digital, and they're the transformers. And then, for want of a better word, we class the rest as dinosaurs, simply because dinosaurs went extinct, and the likelihood is if companies don't learn to evolve, they will also go extinct. And we see these very different approaches to how you think about digital business strategy. The digital predators, those companies that are really learning how to leverage digital to drive revenue, they're really thinking about how do we actually create new sources of value for our customers? How do we help them get to those outcomes? Whereas the transformers and dinosaurs, they're really looking at the existing business and saying, well, we know how to make our existing products and services. We know that we're good at that. So let's add digital capabilities to the existing business. We're not really going to change the business model. We'll kind of digitize it. As I like to describe it, it's kind of like adding the Go Faster stripes to the company, the same way as you add Go Faster stripes to a car as a teenager, and you might expect the car to go faster. In reality, the car won't go any faster. It might look cool, but it doesn't fundamentally change the car. Digital as an add-on to the company It can make it look cool. It can have some incremental benefit, but it doesn't fundamentally change how you create value for customers. And that's at the heart of what I described in my research as the difference between digital bolt-on and digital transformation. And one of the things that's becoming very clear is that we need to help companies figure out how to actually get to that digital transformation, to transform the way they create value for customers. And it's clear from the research that we're no longer in a business where we're just creating products and services, that we now have to design from the get-go products and services and digital experiences, almost like three legs of a stool. You cannot go to market and design just the products and services without first designing the digital experiences that go around those, because that's a large part of how you create the value for the customer. And that's a very different business model. It's in fact, most businesses today, unless they were born digital, are not designed to think, act, and execute this way. And that causes a lot of companies problems, and it makes transformation very, very hard, very challenging for many companies. Another factor that we see in being able to deliver this new business model is the sort of the linear value chain that we've seen in the past has shifted to more of what we might classify as a somewhat overused term, but an ecosystem, a digitally connected ecosystem of value. In other words, companies no longer need to be able to do everything themselves. Today, they're actually looking at how can we partner with other companies to be able to create this value for customers by leveraging the capabilities of different companies that maybe the customer is already connected to. And again, that's a very different set of business connections and ultimately technology connections that need to be made into those companies to enable the transfer of information, data, intelligence, insights around the ecosystem in order to be able to create value for customers in a different way. So this gets to the question I asked at the beginning is, do CEOs need a new kind of CIO? And I have no doubt in my mind the answer to that is absolutely. We need a new kind of CIO. Do we necessarily need a new CIO? No, but I definitely think that the CIO role must evolve, must change, and in fact the expectations of the CEO have to change. I always say CEOs get the CIO they deserve, and by that I mean the CEO, if the CEO thinks that they want to be digitally savvy, transformational, really create value for customers in different ways, they're going to go out and find a CIO that can help them do that. And CIOs that are kind of leading these transformations are doing things differently. They're looking at how to drive this rapid customer-centric innovation in order to be able to prepare themselves for what's coming next. So, for example, at Lowe's, they've been experimenting with augmented reality and virtual reality in order to be able to sort of solve a problem of how do I envision a kitchen design in my own home. Well, the experimentation that they do today may never show any kind of ROI. In fact, it's unlikely to. But it builds up the DNA of the organization, the digital DNA of the organization, to allow them to think about how to take advantage of that when it does become more economically viable to roll out across hundreds or thousands of stores and be able to create that capability maybe in the home for the customer. It is giving them that leg up on that digital capability ladder that they're getting by trying these new things. And that's largely what one of the capabilities that CIOs have to be able to put in place is this culture of innovation. They also have to think about how to deliver high-value end customer experiences. Now, historically, CIOs have often thought about the customer as being an employee inside the organization. And, you know, that's led to a lot of good progress in terms of how CIOs have been able to deliver better service internally to employees. But it really leads to a lot of bad thinking from the point of view of the IT employee, because they start thinking of other employees in the company as a customer. It builds up this us and them kind of thinking, and it takes away from their focus, which should be on the real customer, that customer that they need to create value for as a business. And CIOs and their teams need to be able to get their teams to partner across the business with other employees to be able to create that value, create those high-value experiences. And that's a different focus for many CIOs is shifting the focus from internal to much more external, to thinking about how do we use this technology to create value, to drive revenue in new ways. And that's something that CIOs are definitely going to have to do in the future. And we know that CEOs expect to have greater agility, and they want to reduce the complexity inside the business. Lines of business managers tell us that as well. And so in order to be able to deliver the agility that organizations need to be able to keep up with these changing expectations, CIOs also have to think about how to reshape the governance model and change the way their tech teams operate inside the company in order to be able to evolve at the pace of the customer, at the speed of the customer, and support the lines of business that need to evolve their products, services, and digital experiences at that speed. Again, a very different way of thinking about how the CIO brings value to the customer and to the company. And so ultimately, that new kind of CIO has to be able to build up the company's digital DNA. They have to be able to think about how to design the experiences that deliver the outcomes that satisfy the end customer's desires. That's the challenge for CIOs going forward, and that's why I say, yes, absolutely, we need a new kind of CIO in terms of the things that CIOs need to focus on and how they get their teams to drive those outcomes for their customers. So I think with that, we're going to go, so Diana, are you still there?
I'm still here.
All right, so you and I are going to have a fireside chat, I believe, now. So I'm here. You can fire away.
All right, great. Well, first of all, Nigel, I think the research that you've presented is quite compelling, and I believe it reflects also very well the nature of the conversations that are happening in the CIO circles that I have the opportunity to participate within. And there's an awful lot of interest in learning from one another about how you get started. One of the statistics that you outlined in your report had to do with the fact that only 27% of businesses today have a coherent digital strategy. And as you outlined in the research, by 2020, 50% of all sales will be influenced by the digital agenda. And with companies initially not being designed to evolve and change at the pace that will be required, and this notion of needing a new breed of CIO, can you share some examples of where you've seen CIOs get started on this journey within the companies you've had an opportunity to interact with?
Yeah, happy to sort of expand on that. So, one of the challenges when we talk about the survey results that say 27% have an effective strategy in place, one of the challenges, of course, is how you define strategy, right? So I do make this distinction between the digital bolt-on strategy and the digital transformation strategy. But either way, how that's communicated across the company so that employees understand it and can clearly see how it impacts them is typically one of the things that companies fall down on. So where we see sort of companies say that they don't feel like they've got a clear understanding of the digital strategy, it may not be that the strategy per se is bad. It is more to do with the fact that they are not well communicated. The strategy is not well communicated to employees across the business, and so it makes it difficult for companies for employees across the business to understand where they're going. So, one of the best examples of a company that does this very well, and also happens to be a very large manufacturing conglomerate, is GE. Jeff Immelt has been very visible over the last few years talking about GE's digital transformation. Now, if you think about it, GE is on a journey from a very heavy industrial manufacturing kind of background to becoming a digital business. And that's not just in one part of the business. It's about how do they build the necessary software platforms that will enable their manufacturing businesses to become much more digitally savvy, to use data in new ways, to create value for customers in new ways. And that's a message that he's been communicating not only internally very clearly, but also externally very clearly as well, so that it helps employees understand what the strategy is, but also helps potentially future employees who might consider GE as a place to go work understand where they're going and make it more attractive. Because one of the things that GE understands, and in particular the CEO understands, is that in order to compete in the future, we have to be able to attract really high quality, digitally savvy tech talent. And in order to be able to do that, we're competing against tech companies. So, if we're going to be, a tech company, we have to recognize that we have to change the brand image of the company. We can't be seen as this staid old manufacturing business anymore. We have to help people understand that we are a high-tech company and we're changing the way we do business, and we can change the way that the world uses technology. That's the kind of mission that GE's on, and this kind of thing that Immelt's been very vocal about trying to communicate in order to be able to help the company attract the literally thousands of new tech-savvy talent they need to be able to bring into the organization.
Yeah, I think that's actually an excellent point, and I know there are a lot of there's just a lot of conversations that are focused on how GE is doing a great job of leading the way here. One of the things that I've also heard Jeff speak to when he talks about this transformation that's happening inside of GE is the fact that they had to pick a place to start. And specifically within GE, there were a couple of areas that I think he and the internal CIO and other members of the leadership team focused, and that was in their jet engine division. And a recognition that, back to your earlier point, they make a certain product, but in reality, what their customers wanted was better services and support around that product. So how do we know how well the product is performing? How do we know when maintenance is required on the product? And how do we do a better job of just, in general, having uptime and keeping that asset on the books and functioning as long as possible? And I think one of the other traits that I've seen from CIOs who are starting to push the envelope in this space is this notion that being very close to the core products of their company and or very close to the leadership team as the company is defining what that agenda might be for those products, especially the products that are really most important to the company's growth in the future, and then understanding what internal capabilities need to be developed to ensure that those products take the shape that they need to take. And when I think about that 27% of companies that have this strategy and where CIOs could potentially start, if their company is not one of these 27%, I think identifying where there's tremendous energy within the company around a certain product and identifying how, as the CIO, you can create energy around the opportunity to either better understand and address the expectation of the consumer with that product and improve the customer experience by partnering with those in the business who have responsibility for that, or thinking about how that product could potentially become more intelligent through the addition of Internet of Things kinds of devices. Or lastly, just is it possible to better understand how customers are using the product today so that you could then determine what changes need to be made to the product in the future, which could be the result of tackling an analytics challenge and better understanding that customer usage. Picking a spot like that, or maybe multiple spots like that, where you have the opportunity to make an impact on the business that's focused more on a conversation about driving revenue and driving growth than maybe some of the back office kinds of things that a number of us have to do in order to be successful, but clearly it's not going to carry the day for us moving forward. I think are a couple of examples I've seen where getting started it's a good place. It's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, you have to be able to keep the lights on, right? You can't let the lights go out because all the credibility fails then. So you have to do the basics. You've got to do the blocking and tackling of any tech management leadership job, but then identifying the business unit that maybe is most progressive, most open to new ideas, and trying to partner with that business unit leader and be able to allocate resources to that group to help them think about how to create revenue, create value for customers differently, can be a great way of starting, right? You can't boil the ocean, so you've got to be able to prove capability somewhere, and definitely, finding that positive business unit is much better than trying to find the one that that maybe have the biggest opportunity, but may not be your best ally.
I completely agree. I had an experience in my past where I went to an event with a number of my peers where we talked about how digital was changing healthcare specifically. And as part of that event, there was a 10-minute video that played out what the future might be like in healthcare with a great deal of the technology that was emerging at the time, which at the time I think we were referencing as SMAC, the social, the mobile, the cloud, and analytics. If you recall, that was probably 3 years ago.
Ancient history.
Yes, bringing that video back, and actually I made a point to visit with every single member of our CEO team and our senior management operating team to walk through that video and just engage in a discussion and get their feedback. And not every one of them was initially, engaged in the conversation, but it was really easy for me to find the ones that got pretty excited about it pretty quickly. And based on that, there was then an opportunity for us to dive into this conversation about where we might try to do some things differently around our product strategy or our pipeline or in general capabilities that would make it possible for us to be closer to our patients. So that was one way to get started that worked for me.
Yeah, it's funny. I spend a lot of my time working with the executive teams and just trying to help them shift their thinking around digital to understand the world from a different perspective. I mean, and I meet with a lot of healthcare and pharma companies that talk about, well, what does that industry look like? And it's, one of the kind of the challenges I love to put on the table is, okay, most people in the industry have seen the Proteus pill, which has got this little chip on it, smaller than a grain of sand. You swallow the pill, and the acid in your stomach acts like battery acid, powers this chip, and sends a signal to a patch the person's wearing on the outside of the body, and detects when they swallowed the pill, which is great because some medications are incredibly expensive and they're only effective if they're taken. So it helps reduce the overall cost for the industry and make sure the customer gets healthy. But then, you take that concept and you say, okay, well, we're not really too far away then from being able to swallow a pill that can do a complete breakdown of your body chemistry and send all of that data to a system that will analyze it and use sort of deep analytics to say, okay, well, your predicted days left to live is X. And that's a scary thought, right? It's like, who wants an app that says how many days left you got to live? But in reality, it's the only thing that, it's the only concept we all know, right? We're all going to die sometime. So knowing the information is okay. You get used to it. But then imagine for a second, you go on a binge with your friends and you're drinking a lot and you're eating pizza and all sorts of great things that you really enjoy at the time and regret the next day. And then you look at the app and you suddenly realize you've lost 2 weeks off your life expectancy. That actually has got a lot of impact. And then you go to the gym and you work out for an hour and you find you put another week back on your life expectancy. Now that, again, has a positive impact. And that feedback loop starts to change behavior. And what you see with that is that it actually evolves to helping people live a healthier lifestyle to actually get ill less. And the challenge for the healthcare industry in general is the desired outcome of the customer is actually to never see a doctor. Right, to never have to fall ill, to never get ill until the day they die. And so, anything you can do to help get to that outcome has potential value that can be monetized. And that's a complete mind shift for everybody in the industry. I mean, for sure, when people get ill, they want to get better quickly, and that doesn't go away. But understanding the perspective from what's the outcome the customer desires is really sort of helps people think about the problem differently.
I couldn't agree more, and I think actually the example that you just walked through, the breadth of it, if you think about all the different components that would have to come together to address the patient outcome, there's the actually drug delivery mechanism, there is the way in which the drug is manufactured, there's the way in which the healthcare system comes together, the payers, the providers, et cetera. So this actually, I think, leads to another one of the points that you've outlined in your research, which is that these digital experiences become a multi-stakeholder affair. that there isn't necessarily one player either on the senior leadership team within a company or quite frankly outside of a company that a CIO is going to work with in order to advance this conversation. Again, if we go back to ancient history where I made the reference to SMAC before, there was an awful lot of research that was published on the tension between the CIO and the Chief Marketing Officer. And based on your research, and I would agree, especially given that example that you just used, the conversation is really not just about the relationship with the Chief Marketing Officer, but it's really with any of the leaders that are on that senior team. It might even be the head of strategy or the head of business development that can engage in a discussion about how the business model needs to change and then determine potentially what skill sets exist within the company to make that happen, or what does it look like to partner externally. Can you talk just a little bit more about this component of your research and what you found?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the interesting aspects of kind of this evolving CIO role. Historically, the CIO's always had this ability to run across the corporation and understand all the different aspects of the business, but often it's been very internally focused. You take that capability and you shift it towards how do you do that for the customer, how do you create value for the customer, and you're leveraging a lot of the skills that a good CIO has, but you're pushing the role of technology very much into the realm of product development, product design, the understanding the customer, so the CMO aspect and how to be able to get that, what are the customer desires and how do we satisfy those? You're looking at business operations and how you execute. All of those things come together, and particularly when you sort of layer into that the need to create this agile company, this rapid sense and respond company that can understand when those expectations evolve and change and how to evolve at that speed. And technology and the capabilities of the technology group become central to success of a business going forward. So instead of the CIO role becoming this sort of, what it used to be is kind of like often CEOs would hire a CIO and then say, okay, well, you can report to the CFO because they take care of all the operational stuff. I don't really want to be dealing with it. That might have worked in the past. That won't work in the future. In the future, CEOs have to understand the technology capabilities their company is deploying, how they're actually deploying that to be able to drive revenue in the future. And the CIO is going to be definitely a key player in being able to help shape strategy and deliver the execution of that strategy. And so that's one of the reasons why I see this role changing. Now, that's not to say that those people in that role have never existed. I would estimate that over the last 20, 30 years, I've seen about 20% of CIOs would fall into that highly business-savvy, outcome-driven, revenue-driven kind of CIO. And the other 80% were much more oriented towards highly efficient, effective technology operations, keeping the lights on, keeping the operations of the business running very effectively. It's a different mindset and a different approach. Both have been valuable. But I think in the future, what I see happening is that business-oriented, revenue-centric CIO is the one that will come to dominate. And that's the one that CEOs need to be able to have in place in order to be able to be successful going forward. And that requires this ability to build this collaboration across the enterprise. And it means that it's not about how big a team can the CIO put underneath them. That's irrelevant. In fact, where people report in the future is increasingly irrelevant, right? The really high-performing digital savvy, what we would call digital predator companies, really they don't focus on organizational hierarchy. They focus on bringing the right skills together to solve a particular customer challenge, and people, they collaborate around the skill sets that they bring to the table, and it has very little to do with organizational hierarchy. The companies that are still wedded to a hierarchical approach to business, a top-down command and control, are not going to have the agility they need to survive going forward. So that's a different set of skills, different set of collaboration that's needed. And CIOs have to be willing to put the resources that they have under their control embedded into different parts of the organization to make these things happen in the way they need to happen.
I would agree with you there. I can say that there are actually probably a couple of watch-out areas here for a CIO who is working very closely to change the business model of a company. And that could be that if the CIO gets out too far ahead of those those partners on the executive team, it can begin to look like it's an IT initiative. And a couple of ways I think to avoid that, back to your prior point, is as there's an opportunity to identify who the early adopters are within the organization, really important again to make sure that whatever it is the proof of concept is that's being experimented with is owned by the people who will ultimately be responsible for the P&L around that product. I have seen in a couple of cases where there's an internal team that's working to push the digital agenda, and unfortunately the P&L owner for the product didn't feel like they were on the hook for whatever the commitment was that was being made around the investment. So I think it's an important watch-out point to make sure that there's always a connection to the person who owns that product when there's experimentation going on. I think the second watch-out that I've seen occur is that every part of a company takes pride in the work that they do within their respective geographic area or functional area around innovation. And typically they hire thought leaders that are really good at differentiating how it is that particular organization is going to innovate. And when there's a central person who's trying to drive a different way of thinking about innovation, if that individual in the form of a CIO isn't working with those people across the different places in the organization that are already innovating to bring them together and form a collaborative team where the innovation builds on what each of those groups are doing, it can look as if a separate innovation group is trying to be set up. That would in essence leave those innovation people sort of waiting at the sidelines. So really important, I think, to reach out and find where those resources are in the organization and pull them in and make them a part of envisioning the future so that they don't get left again on the sidelines.
Yeah, it's a really important point. And in fact, the one of the things that kind of that highlights to me is the difference between, say, setting up an innovation center of excellence versus building an innovation culture in an organization. And of course, there are very different approaches to innovation. And I think the research is pretty clear that while building an innovation culture in an organization is by far the hardest thing to do, it is definitely the way forward for companies. And I think the biggest obstacle to that invariably becomes the culture of the organization, because to develop an innovative culture, you have to have a fairly high tolerance for failure. And many organizations, if you think about successful innovation, maybe 1 in 100, or very best 1 in 10, and that means 9 failures for every 1 success, or 99 for every 1. Either way, if somebody fails that much in an organization, they're probably going to be thrown out in most organizations. So it's this ability to accept failure as part of the course, the journey towards success. And most cultures are not very good at doing that, particularly in for-profit organizations that are sort of built around trying to create sort of very high revenue generating products and services very quickly. It's how do we fail fast and learn from those failures and develop that culture that does that in sort of in a very positive way. One of the few companies I've seen probably excel at this is probably Google. And of course, they're a born digital company, so they kind of don't have a lot of the history behind them.
So actually, that leads me to build on a point you made as you were walking through your research, and it speaks to the nonlinear value chains and the role that partners can play in helping companies to think differently in this space. And then there also is a point that you've made about the war for talent, and I'm wondering if you could speak just a bit about how partners can help CIOs work with their leadership teams to shape the digital strategy within their company, and or potentially how do partners play in the space of helping a CIO work with their peers to build out the skills and capabilities that are required to make a difference here.
Yeah, I mean, the role of sort of the technology partners for the CIO, I think, is definitely more strategic than it has been for many companies. And it's really around there's two aspects of it. One is the strategy, so bringing examples of how they've helped other companies evolve their digital sort of strategy, their digital journey. It can help the CIO illustrate points to their executive team. So a lot of challenges CIOs have with the executive team is helping them see the world differently, right? So vendors have that ability to be able to say, here's what we've done with other companies, or even take the executive team into some of those other companies where they're not competing to show the kind of thinking that's going on in those companies and how it differs from what's gone in the past. So that, that strategic thinking catalyst is one role that technology vendors really need to be able to step up and play. And the other is, of course, around the tech talent, where everybody's really competing for the same talent. But tech companies in particular, the CIO's partners, are in a position to help the CIO transition some of their teams and build their skills that are more suited to that digital transformation journey. So rather than expecting to be brought in to do all of the cool stuff, tech vendors obviously need to have an approach of, yes, we'll come in and help you with some of that cool stuff, but one of the things we want to be able to do is help make sure you have those capabilities to be able to do the things you need to do going forward. And that's a real, if you think about it from a technology vendor perspective, that is a focus on the customer's desire. What's the outcome the customer desires? And in that case, the desire of the CIO and the company isn't necessarily just to have somebody come in and do something and deliver it. It's to be able to transfer that capability into the organization so they're building that digital DNA going forward. So that is definitely a role for tech players in that that sort of drive for hiring talent. But everybody's competing for the same talent. So it's very hard for a lot of non-tech companies to try and make their organization look cool to some of the tech talent that's out there. And sometimes the only way of being able to bring some of those high-end skill sets in is by bringing them in through a tech partner.
Yeah, I agree. I could say I think so. I feel very fortunate in that I work at a tech company now, and as I think about building out the skills of the team here internally to Workday, I have the opportunity to leverage the strengths of the customer experience team and the data team that were so core to building out our platform. In my prior role, when I worked in the life science industry, I didn't have that skill set readily accessible. And again, what worked for us there, and I'll speak specifically to the space of data analytics, was, in so many companies, there are pockets of talent that are really very good at understanding the data. And in reality, are acting as data scientists without ever having been given the title to be a data scientist. And one of the things that we found in helping us to build out our own internal data science capability is where we had 2 or 3 of these individuals that were located in different parts throughout the business, our business partners, if you will, we surrounded them with the best people we had within IT in the data space or in the technology space. And then we picked these pilot initiatives that gave us an opportunity to try out some of the new higher-end analytics and, again, big data technologies, if you will. And as we got a few of those quick wins under our belt, we found this ripple effect started to occur, where there would be more people within the function who would understand the good work that was happening there and would want to be part of it and get exposed to it. And what we found over the course of really no more than 12 to 18 months is that ripple effect became so broad within the respective functions that we were able to connect those teams cross-functionally. And again, it didn't require that we went out and just hired, 100 data scientists from some university, but rather there was a nice mix of building our own internal skill sets, investing in our own people, working with our business partners to advance their skill sets, and then recruiting. And it was a combination of all 3 of those approaches to building out the talent that helped us to move forward in that particular space. I'd be curious to know what your experience is, Nigel, as you've talked with CIOs and with other organizations about what's worked for them.
Well, one of the things that I think, yes, I've seen a lot of CIOs say, yes, we sort of collaborate around these this collaborative groups and teams. A lot of co-location helps. Some CIOs will report good results from partnering with local universities to try and seed both the tech, high tech sort of graduates in terms of the sort of courses that they're going into, but also internships and work placements, and trying to get people in early is a way of sort of attracting talent into the organization. Certainly internships are a great way of trying to make people aware of the potential opportunities inside companies. We also see shifts in how companies are doing things like high performer sort of mentoring inside organizations in order to be able to keep talent, because obviously one of the challenges is not only attracting this sort of the high-tech talent, but also how do you keep them, and that's very challenging for many organizations. So you have to be able to have this sort of ability to mentor people into those roles, but also help them nurture their career development as well, and see that they're having this ongoing growth in their tech skills, which is very important to people in the industry. Which leads me on to this kind of point about the evolving skill set, right? So one of the things that we found is that there's actually a different set of skills required or becoming required out of the tech management leadership team, and learning these new kind of skills that haven't been part of the tech group before. Things like design thinking, UX design, customer experience journey mapping, those kind of new, more customer-facing type of skill sets. Some of them may even be considered sort of softer skill sets. Have you seen that in your your work with CIOs and your clients?
Absolutely, and when you started this morning, Nigel, you referenced the external facing or the outside in view that CIOs need to take in this digital space. And you referenced also that historically CIOs treated the internal employee as customers, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly that the point of view that's been successful for so many CIOs I know is to think about the internal employee very much as a business partner. That being said, because there is this expectation that's been set, quite frankly, with all of us, about how easy our devices and tools should be to use and how intuitive they should be, I know you've heard from all of us that we feel as a group of CIOs that we can do a better job with the experience that we give to our internal teammates around just thinking about their user experience from start to finish. So that's something that we're doing here, and as I said earlier, I have the opportunity to build on the strengths of an incredibly talented user experience team that was behind the experience our customers have when they use Workday, to think about how do we bring those skill sets into internal IT and then use those to make the environment for our teammates here a much more productive and enjoyable and engaging experience for them, which, to your earlier point as well, makes it a fun environment and an energizing environment to be part of, and one that makes it easier for us to retain our talent.
Yeah, and you can track, obviously, to the degree to which you can track the metrics around that in terms of, say, employee retention or reduced onboarding levels. They can obviously have a direct impact, not only on the bottom line, but particularly for customer-facing employees and being able to retain those. They can make a huge difference on the customer experience. And so what I usually encourage CIOs to think about is not only how do you change that internal employee experience, but how do you change the employee experience in a way that creates value for customers? So you look at what's the employee trying to do that helps the customer, how does that impact the customer journey, and then you look at trying to tackle the low-hanging fruit first, which very often is how do you give the customer back time, how do you remove touch points from the customer, etc. So you can tackle those employee experiences inside the organization in ways that also have a direct impact on the end customer, and therefore hopefully have a value impact for the end customer as well. So keeping all of these things connected becomes part of the success mechanism for the tech team in order to be able to show how the tech team is driving value for the business.
Absolutely. So I think, unfortunately, we are getting close to the top of the hour, and I believe we might have a few questions on the line. So Nigel, is it okay if we turn it over to Mike and let him take us through Q&A?
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Diana and Nigel. It's been a really interesting discussion that you guys have been having. We had one question come in that stated as a CIO, and Diana, I think you touched on this just a little bit, I find my customers tend to be defined as everyone, internal and external. We touch all areas of the organization. Could you provide additional insights as to how organizations have successfully transitioned to focus on their true customers?
Actually, Mike, you're right. I did reference that just in my last comment. I have never been a fan of referring to my internal business partners or stakeholders, if you will, and I use those terms fairly interchangeably as customers. And the challenge is that, you know, there's this saying that's been around for quite some time, which is the customer is always right. And internally, our goal ought to always be ensuring that everything we do, and I think this is Nigel's last point, everything we do internally is with the external customer in mind. And that might mean that we take a path internally that isn't necessarily going to be the perfect path for how we might define a process or design a user interface, because in reality what it does is it sets us up to be able to divert more of our resources to solving an external customer problem or serving our external customer. So personally, I think that's a healthy point of view to take. You know, Nigel?
Yeah, this is actually something that comes up a lot in my workshops I do on IT transformation. It's about changing the mindset. So one of the first steps that I try and get leadership teams to do is to change the language they're using, right? So you can't change this focus towards the external customer if you're still talking about employees inside the company as customers. So the very first thing CIOs do to change this culture is to stop referring to employees as customers. Because when the CIO stops doing it and they get their team to stop doing it, that trickles down to the rest of the tech organization. And it's the language we use that causes a lot of the behaviors, right? So if we want to stop the us and them perspective, like IT and the business, like they're different things, in my experience, they've always been the same, right? IT is part of the business. So let's stop talking about IT and the business like they're two different things. They're not customers. They're employees we partner with to deliver value to the real customer. And if we align around the goals that those employees have and how they're measured, then we can create more value for them and their customer. And that's part of that process. It all starts with how we think and how we talk about that relationship.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks. The next question we have here is, how does that, or they've commented there's very interesting points about the new capabilities required in a company. How does that change the corporate versus business unit level IT team capabilities and structure?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, you know, you have to look at the tech capabilities of the entire enterprise and where they're best deployed, right? So some capabilities are still best put in a central coordinating function. Some are best distributed out into the business units. It does depend on the structure of the organization. Hopefully, business units will evolve to be more customer-centric as opposed to product-centric, but that in itself is a challenge. And the one thing you want to be able to avoid is having these two tech teams see themselves as competing with each other, right? So, you know, very often you'll see a business unit IT group be considered to be almost rogue IT by the central IT group, and they compete with resources, they compete for projects and influence in the organization. You've got to get the metrics aligned across these groups so that everybody works together, not just within the tech group, but also in the business units to help create that revenue growth and the value for the customer. And fundamentally, you know, one of the things I found it comes down to is start with the metrics. Look at how people are being measured and how they're being measured for, you know, what the success looks like. And very often you'll find those metrics are causing those conflicts because of the way they're being measured.
I can't add anything to that. That was a great answer, Nigel.
Well, thank you, Dan.
All right, great. We have time for one more question. So I think this last question is going to be one that's a little bit more fun for you guys. Are there any technology trends that particularly excite you as you look out a few years?
Well, the one that really excites me, I think, is the potential for augmented reality and virtual reality I think a lot of people still think it as a sort of a gaming kind of environment, but I think it has huge potential to change how we experience the physical world around us in ways that we haven't yet conceived. I think that's going to, the technology to support that kind of environment is evolving very quickly, and so that's going to have a big impact. And then from a societal impact, the biggest one I think that people haven't got their heads around yet is autonomous driving. So autonomous trucks, autonomous cars will have a huge impact on society, how cities are built, how we interact, how we communicate, how products and services are delivered. I mean, everything. It's going to transform the insurance industry. All sorts of industries are going to be torn apart by that change.
And I think I agree with Nigel about those two. The only other one I would add is the fact that every device, every piece of something is becoming a smart component of this Internet of Things. And I think what we'll have the opportunity to better understand moving forward because of that, and how that will reshape the experiences we have just interacting with one another on a day-to-day business is quite frankly probably not something we all have our heads around just yet, but very exciting.
Yeah, huge shift.
Well, great. That was a very insightful, very interesting presentation and conversation that you two gave. Just as a reminder to everybody on the webinar, this was recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording after the webinar completes. So Nigel and Diana, I wanted to thank you for your time and insights today. And with that, we'll wrap up the call.
Thank you, Mike. It was wonderful, Nigel. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Appreciate it.